Hello and welcome back to my corner of the internet, where we're going to continue to talk about channeling and what that means, what it can look like. With this subject being one of my favorites, and being, as I said in the first video, near and dear to my heart, I love opening up the space to have this conversation with you guys, to dispel any myths, concerns, and to invite you into a more than potentially beautiful experience with, as much caution as necessary, and freedom at the same time. So that's what we're going to be talking about again, for the, I think, third video in the row, for this evening. And so join me, get comfortable, drop your questions in the chat. We are live here now, or you can hit me up in the comment section, and I'd love to address whatever you'd like to ask. Very open, and I love the opportunity to expand my own mind. So whatever feelings you're having about what I'm saying, or your own experiences with channeling, feel free to share, and I invite the conversation live or otherwise. So tonight's discussion on channeling, I wanted to touch on what I would call, so with channeling, there's a lot of different opportunities. I mentioned in the beginning, you can either use tools, you can be a vessel for a message while you're in a very present and conscious state, just as we're having a conversation here. Some might say that, upon watching this video or watching other videos, that the way that the information was given to them, it was almost as if it was channeled to them. So, or you might hear friends saying, I had a download, or I have channeled a message for such and such. And that's one experience, one that is less common, and less prevalent. I guess common and prevalent, I'm being redundant, but one you see less of and experience less of, I would say, on a sincere level, is trance channeling. Even though I think that trance channeling is one of the most beautiful spiritual experiences that a person can have. And believe it or not, there's a handful, and there's a handful that can touch you so deeply as to communicate with a being through another person. And of course, there are parameters around that, and safety and things like that you want to get into. And like I said, there are people that end up, channeling their own ego, or some aspect of their pain, versus a higher dimensional being. And so with trance channeling, you can, just as much as conscious channeling, you can channel almost anything. And then I recall growing up in the church. So, well, I grew up in Catholic school, and we went to church regularly based on the schools. Like, it was built into the curriculum to go to mass. And then I switched into Christianity, and would go, I was in church almost every day. And with that, where I'm going with this is the term that would be thrown out for something like trance channeling is possession. So I thought this would be a great space to talk about that, talk about the different frequencies of beings that can come through when experiencing a trance channel or trance channeling yourself, and see where the conversation takes us. So again, drop comments in the comment section if you like. Share your questions if you have them. This is a dynamic topic. Certainly only take things from me that feel resonant. What I'm offering is a gift. It's not doctrine, and it's certainly not gospel. So, feel into it and find your own truth, and hopefully somewhere in the middle we'll find that universal truth that never changes. So with channeling and trance channeling, my first encounter with trance channeling was Paul Selig. I believe I mentioned him on a couple of other, like maybe a couple videos back. And with Paul, I wasn't sure what to make of it. What I was looking at was a human being who was whispering under his breath, and then he'd come out and say loudly whatever was whispered. And that is how Paul's entities, for terminology's sake, because entities doesn't necessarily indicate a negative spirit or a negative being. Entities is, it's an energy, it's a consciousness. And so Paul's entities or his beings or his guides will come in, and as he's channeling, they'll whisper the message first, and then they'll another set of beings will come in and say it out loud. And this is, and you'll hear him kind of going back and forth, and you may even see his body, jerking in such a way that leads you to believe that, something's happening internally as well. I feel like this is a good place to talk about as I'm describing Paul Selig's process. And of course, he would be the definitive expert on his process. I'm simply inferring on what I'm observing. So with regard to that, trance channeling, by definition, is you completely setting your consciousness aside so that you can allow whatever it is that you're working with, be it your spirit guides, your beings, whoever, to step into your physical body and to take control. For some trance channels, this is a cognitive process entirely. So they will slip into a what I would say is a theta, maybe alpha or theta brainwave state. So they're calm, they're relaxed, and they're not fully here. Some do stay partially, and you'll hear people talk about that. Like Bonita Woods, it's an amazing trance channel. And sometimes when she's channeled, she's like, oh, I'm only halfway out. I'm watching the whole thing unfold. And so that would be partially leaving your consciousness, but, so that another being that can step in. And then there is being a full channel and then everything in between. So being a full channel means that they get access to your entire body, your organs, your limbs. They may even have you stand up. They may use your body to gesture and talk. And it's a full process. And so you will find across YouTube a lot of what I would say are mental channels where they're partially out. It's fully cognitive, and they're simply speaking to you, and there's not a lot of movement happening. It's just, they seem to be in a quieted state, and then they're able to convey their messages. And then you have a great example of a full channel, not only Paul Selig, but Abraham Hicks. That was my second introduction to channeling. And I was like, what in the world? And what impressed me about Esther, who is Abraham's vessel, is the level of trust that she has, and the fact that the cohesion of their relationship is one where they can stand her up to walk around, gesture, talk, and speak to you, and you can still feel the vibration. You still have this understanding that you're communicating with otherworldly beings, because I believe Abraham is a collective, not one being. And this is another aspect of channeling that we can dive deeply into probably here on this video. So that's a little bit about trance channeling. It is about setting your consciousness aside, either partially or fully, so that another being can step in and convey messages in a way that is, loving, understanding, whatever the point of the messaging is. Now, there are plenty of people that believe that this is not an okay thing. And, there are challenges with being a trance channel. There are, there can be physical complications. And it's a lot of labor and effort on the physical body dealing with etheric energy in that way. And then there are a lot of positive benefits as well, in my opinion. And so we'll dive deeper into that as well. So for somebody like Abraham or Paul Selig who is going through their process, to the physical body is a very powerful. It's a very powerful thing, and it's capable of a lot. But when you start bringing through energies that are bigger than the soul it was crafted for, you can, when you start sharing that space, when you start having the vessel share space, their soul and another being, it can become challenging. They can have chronic conditions that are exacerbated by inflamed states, and that are caused by the higher vibrating energies. So that said, there are complications involved. And when you're considering, if you're considering being a channel, it's worth learning as much as you can about this process. Oh goodness, what is her name? Madam, oh gosh, her name is right on the tip of my tongue. Madam Blavatsky is a great person to read up on. She was all about her craft, and I have not seen a more serious, dedicated individual to what they do. Now, she's very much in the occult realm of things, and I know occult concepts get really bad rep. Personally, I think it's important to note the individual conducting occult activities in a negative way versus labeling all of occultism bad. But that's probably the Libra part of me that's like, give it a chance. So I will say, reading up on what she did kind of can expand your mind on what's possible when it comes to channeled work. And it can, there are channels out there that you can get in touch with, that it's not just about conveying messages, like Abraham Hicks, like Paul Selig, like Czar, another amazing channel is my friend Angelica Blackmoon. Um, you know, she is an incredible channel, and she conveys amazing messages with the being that she channels. And this is a great space to say, unlike Paul Selig and Abraham, Angelica Blackmoon only channels one being, and so this doesn't make it good, better, or best, right? This is about the frequencies that you'll feel, the intensities that you'll feel, the variations in messaging that you'll get. So Abraham being a collective, Paul Selig channeling a collective. When you work with Angelica Blackmoon, you're dealing with one being that just feels like the father you never had. It's the best way that I can describe it, and the best friend you've always wanted. And so, what is beautiful about Angelica, I know this sounds like a good spotlight for her, right? But she's really amazing. And so if you do get a chance to work with her, you should. Um, with Angelica, she straddles the fence of being both a trans channel that conveys information, but also she's a trans channel that's capable of the healing aspect of trans channeling. So this is one of the benefits of trans channeling that I was putting forward. And that is to say, there is a space where channels can allow a being to come in, and that being can either work on your energy field or work on the channel themselves. And when that happens, what comes forward is an opportunity for whatever disease process you have or whatever conditions you have, if they should have an emotional tie or a spiritual tie, which everything is spirit and emotion in terms of um, in terms of the cause of disease. Science is catching up to say, a lot of the emotions that we experience have disease factors as well that materialize if those emotions are not resolved within the body in time. So things within our body start out spiritually and then they materialize in a way that is designed to get your attention. So, not only is it designed to get your attention, but you may have a predisposition for it in your family. And so from there, you go from a space of, okay, this spiritual thing is just nagging me, it's trying to get my attention. And you're like, no, 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 I don't have time for it. I've got to deal with, all these things going on in my life, only for it to materialize in a way that asks you to pause and then continue to explore what is happening in your body. And I know our society isn't designed for that. So when you work with somebody like Angelica Black Moon, or you work with a trance channel that allows a being to come in and to work on your energy field, they're working at the foundation of the root, like the root cause of what your disease process may be. And that's really, it's a sustainable way to do healing. There is much to be done in the realm of the physical, and to work with tools like holistic options, or to exercise, or to use allopathic medicine if that is required, because that does have its place for a period of time in people's lives. But when you combine all of those things, you can really see a transition in some conditions that you have. There is a place where the body gets into habit and it locks it in. I do believe in the miraculous personally, and for others, but the mind and the body can work to trap some things in. So in any case, when you're working with a trance channel who does healing work, that's what they're working on. So they allow the being to come in, they're working on your energy field, and they're working to shift things around, and maybe even to bring you back to that place that you were at the moment that you received your trauma, or at the moment where you had the debilitating experience. And then they're working backwards in time. So they'll go to that place, work on the healing, and then that energy is supposed to radiate forward. And it's an entire process. And in the preceding weeks, you may find yourself triggered in ways that cause you to face that experience again through other people or through related experiences. And the healing comes in the strength you find in yourself, or in the peace that you find in yourself, or the resolution that you find in yourself, because all of that equates to strength. But that is how the healing takes place. We can see this as another example, not necessarily in trance healing work, but in energy work. So when an energy working person is working on you, they're doing the same thing, but they're conscious, instead of allowing a being to enter their field or enter their body to do the work. So Reiki is a great example. When a Reiki practitioner is working on you, instead of allowing a being to step into their body, they're allowing the Reiki energy to come through, because it's universal light source energy. So this universal energy comes through, and the reference to it being universal is to say that Reiki is an intelligent energy that will go to the spaces and places in your body that it's necessary for healing, and then it will expand itself. And not only will it do that in your physical body, but it'll do it on your timeline as well. So again, just like I mentioned with the trance healing work, with Reiki, it will flow backwards in time to reach the spot of your trauma, your pain, or your challenge, and then it will flow forward. And without much effort from the practitioner, in both trance healing states and in Reiki, of course, there is the cautionary tale. You definitely want to be working with somebody that you trust, somebody that is working on their own healing, because you might trust them, but they may not be doing their own personal work. And so those two things are key in how they will support you, because what you don't want to happen is for your Reiki practitioner or your trance healer to be channeling something of their own and for them to flow that into you. And now you're just sharing energy back and forth. How will you know? um, what will likely end up happening is you'll start to move through or come to some realizations that don't feel like yours. So, after a Reiki healing session or after a trance healing session, you may feel a little heavy. You may be like, wow, I feel like I just worked out in the gym for 2 hours. Those kinds of things can happen. You can go through a healing crisis where you get a rash, or um, your body reacts in a way that is a stress state. That's normal, and that's called a healing crisis. But when you're dealing with somebody either trance channeling their own stuff or something negative, or you deal with a Reiki practitioner who's just pushing forward their own energy, you're going to walk away invariably with their stuff. And so we could probably do a longer video on how to get through that if you've had it happen, or avoid it if you're trying to avoid it. Drop some comments in the comment section if you'd like me to do a longer video on that, because it's not that complicated. So we won't be here forever, but there is a way to go around that. Just to give you another example of a trance healer, you'll see this sometimes in Hindu practices, where you have a person designated for embodying a god, or a Hindu god or goddess. And when you go or a saint, and when you go and you touch that person's feet, or they hug you, or they kiss you, or they put hands on you for a blessing, it is not the human form that is doing that. It is whoever it is that they're supposed to be embodying as a god or goddess, and for their life they're treated as such. I had the wonderful honor of having a guru come and sit at my shop and do healing work for people, and to teach the healing work. It was called Prana Shakti. And when we would be in session with him, he would be in that meditative state that I would define it from a Western perspective as trance. He would go into that state, and then ethereally, he would work on your energy field. So, in energy healing classes on the West, in Western places, you might see people, putting their hands over you in very specific places and manipulating your energy field that way. A trance healer is not going to need to, one, sit in front of you, and two, no matter where they are in the world, their energy, or the energy of the being they're channeling, will be what touches you. And you may have some sensations. The sensations that are experienced with trance healing work vary based on your personal awareness. So if you are a person who is completely out of touch with your body or your energy field, you may not have much of an experience. Your mind may tell you to pay attention to what's in the room and trying to define, should you be seeing colors, and it's going to grasp. Your mind is going to be driving the bus. But if you can, and it's hard to do, but with practice, you can get into your body and start asking, okay, am I feeling any shifts, any changes? You're not forcing it. You're just asking questions. You're exploring. You're, oh, wait a minute. I think my heart rate increased slightly, and that's something. Or, my temperature rose or it dropped. I felt like somebody was holding my feet. That's what a lot of people would say when they were in healing sessions with me. I'd be at their head and they'd say, hey, who was holding my feet? And I'm like, I don't know, your aunt. It always varied. And we try to get those answers. But the point is that we invited in many people. And so when I would be at a person's head holding their head, conducting the energy work. I would go into a point of trance at some points, and I might sway a little bit, I might start singing, and then another being like Kuan Yin, can recall coming in one time and doing a healing over a person, or Mother Mary was also somebody who would come in. Sometimes Jesus showed up and we'd like dap it up with high five, It's like, okay, Jesus, do your thing, But it wasn't always these sort of common characters. Sometimes I'd have someone come in like Kali to, cut away, um, oppression and suppression, or it'd have, and I would always ask for beings either in the person's field or in my field. And so Kali isn't one of mine. She's cool though. And so for that person, they had this sort of warrior, fighter, defender spirit. And so that's who showed up for them. But all of these examples are available when you are working with a trance healer. And so, on the one hand, bringing to the forefront that you can have messages. And I recall in my last video, I was like, well, if you're stressed out, you really don't want to be doing channeling work. What I described in the realm of healing, doing trance healing, is an opportunity for the healer to receive. And this is a point where I'd invite you to my own life and my own story. I'd had about 3 days of messages, and I keep my messages in a little brown book with an owl on it. And I write them out, and it's a beautiful time. And then I get up the next morning, and I'm like, okay, nothing's coming through. And so in that moment, and I think I shared this on another video, in that moment, I just allowed, and I said, okay, well, if there's nothing for me to, write or take down, could I receive a healing? I don't know if I need a healing, or if I have anything to upgrade or, let go of. I'm open to receiving. And in that moment, having the energy come and, lay hands on me and push through different circumstances, feeling my cells expand, feeling my energy field open up, feeling my heart open up. All of that was a trance healing moment, but it was for me, the healer specifically. These things can come, like I said, in the form of healing. They can also come in the form of upgrades. So, a shamanic practitioner that I know introduced me to the medical assistance program. And there's a book. I thought I'd bring it. There's lighting issues over there. So the MAP program is an interesting program because it's not one. Michelle Small-Wright, who wrote the book, basically is giving you free access to beings that she channeled, that she calls the White Brotherhood. I know that sounds has racial tones. But she channeled this book, she channeled this collective, and they are available to everybody to do surgery on you if you're experiencing pain. There's a section on there where it talks about working on children, and there's a section in there where it talks about bringing these beings in if you are a healer working on other people. And so this is another instance where channeled beings are coming in to do healing work on your behalf. And this is a great example of when you don't have to be in trance in order to invite these beings in. And so I can link that book in the description, or if anybody's interested in the title. But these are all examples of trance work. Now, in the church or in other spaces where this work is kind of frowned upon, we might be looking at terminology like possession. I like to kind of draw the distinction between the two because possession has such a heavy connotation. If you are dealing with channeling and trance work, more than likely you're going to be dealing with beings that are here for a purpose. You've asked them to show up, you've asked them a question, or they're here working with you to convey things to the world. Possession over the years has um, become this dirty word where, you're throwing up and you're um, vomiting. Well, you're throwing up and you're vomiting. It's the same thing. Your head spinning. You're being lifted off the bed. There's like the Hollywood version of those things. Um, I would say there is some overlap. Like if a trance channel would technically be possessed, but not in the way that requires an exorcism, which is, as the English language gets smaller and smaller, we start blending things together, and that's why I feel there's an important need for distinction with possession and channeling. So, if you're having negative experiences, if the beings that are coming through are telling you to hurt people, hurt yourself, things like that, then and you don't feel in control and you don't have the power to say no, then you're probably dealing with a possession, and that requires assistance. It requires work, and it's not something that you can just go to a quick, for a quick healing on the weekend and come back clean from. Normally, you're going to have to do a couple days process. You may even have to have multiple people working on you. It depends on the depth of the situation. A lot of times, possession happens out of ignorance rather than is this person a good person or a bad person. So, what you're dealing with is somebody who doesn't believe they have the power to say no. And a lot of times, this is what you see happens to children. So, we tell them to listen to the adults, listen to the authority figures, don't ask questions, sit down, do your work. And we don't ask them to feel into their own intuition or to, assess whether this is sound or if it sounds bad. Like they've been, this thing may be telling them to hurt people and it sounds authoritative, um, like their parents did. But we're not asking children to really check in with their own sense of knowing. And so with that happening, this is why children can kind of, unfortunately, get looped into possession if that happens. It's pretty rare. I would say real possession is pretty rare. You can have what are lesser beings, called attachments, where they're siphoning your energy or they're causing negative circumstances in your life or they're tripping you up and causing you pain. Those typically are attachments and they're intense attachments, but a true possession where things are moving across the room or your life is stopped by what's happening is pretty rare. And if it is happening to you, this is not a place to minimize it. If it's happening to you, it's happening, and there is help available out there. Um, I say all of that to say now we've created a distinction between channeling, which tends to be either trance channeling, which tends to invite in, preferably who you say is coming or who you allow from a positive spectrum or a higher vibration spectrum. So you have trance channeling of higher beings, you have trance healing work, you have possession, and then you have this weird space where people are now coming to realize that there are more than just angels and spirit guides and loved ones out there, in African cultures, in Brazilian cultures. I shouldn't say just Brazil, but South American cultures, and cultures outside of the United States or Europe, or Russia. There are beings that feel more dense, and those sometimes show up and it can feel negative. So this is the importance of development. This is the importance of learning as much as you can, preferably not learning by mistake, but it happens. Talking to as many experienced channels as you can so that you can develop your own work, maybe taking courses, who knows. You don't need a certification though. So I say all of that to say, um, there are beings that exist that are more dense. So, for instance, the saints and deities that come with a lot of African cultures like Yoruba, um, they feel dense when they walk in the room. And my experience with that, and if others have other experiences, please join the conversation, is that they are so ancient and so deeply connected with the earth. You know, when you think about angels and higher beings, you tend to reach for the sky, or at least that's the visual we're given, right? Wings flying around, bright lights. But what about the earth? You know, we're so quick to leave this planet, and we don't explore what's underneath the soil. And that's where you will find these tribal energies that are very dense. And if you've never encountered them, it can cause you to pause and go, wait a minute, is this something I need to be concerned about? Or is this something for me to have a great deal of respect for and, have a conversation first before I start going into channeling them and, working with them. And that should be the case across the board. But, um, you know, I recall a situation where I was working with an individual and they started to channel an earthly energy, a very dense energy that they weren't used to. And it drove them into a place of fear. And so um, I'm observing the process that's unfolding before me. And there was a third individual in the room, and they went on to try and like pray this spirit away and banish it. And they're, hooping and hollering, and none of that was working. And this was my first interaction outside of myself with an earthly dense being. And as I'm watching this interaction unfold, I'm noticing that it's not working. And I don't believe it to be the power of the person that was trying to exercise what was happening or to release this energy from this person. But what I was watching unfold was that this person who had the dense being in them, the dense being was not evil. It was not darkness. And so that's why it wasn't responding to the exclamations of leave this person or banishment or psalms that were being read. It was not a darkness. It wasn't a dark force that was put off by those things. It was probably being tickled by them. I don't know. But ultimately, what resolved the situation and the being that was in this person was love and embrace and understanding. And so when this person who had now been driven into a place of fear was just exhausted and crying, embracing them, hugging them and holding them and saying, okay, we're going to get through this, and being reassuring and loving, actually released the fear, which then released the entity, the attachment, the being that was in this person. And again, it wasn't an evil circumstance. So trance work is very complicated. It shouldn't be taken on lightly. At the same time, it can be a very beautiful experience. And if you are a healer who sort of steps aside for energy to come through, you're probably already doing trance healing work. Protection is always important. And if you have the awareness to know who you are, I mentioned that in the first video, I believe it was, where I said, when you're just before you go into channeling, evaluate yourself so you know the difference between you and whatever you're working with, because these things are what allow you to release if when you're done, or to release when you realize this is not something that I want to work with. And it doesn't necessarily have to be darkness or evil for you to say no. Like, there are plenty of beings that I'm just like, nah, it's not my speed. No, thanks. And you can do the same. Again, in this conversational space, remember, anything that I'm talking about having done or experienced, it's available to you. Now, we've gone through channeling by itself. We've gone through using tools. We've gone through in this conversation um, channeling in trance and what that can look like, and the difference between that and what would commonly be called possession, having to deal with negative influences, and then there's the healing component. I would love to hear from you all. What what has your experience been? Good, bad, or indifferent? Have you dealt with attachments or did you deal with a full blown possession experience? What has your experience been of channeling? It seemed like in 2020 and 2021, a lot of people, a lot of humans woke up to their own ability to channel, and I'm seeing a little bit more and more of that on YouTube. It's fascinating, it's beautiful, it's expansive, and then it's a fun place to look at some and go, "No, that doesn't resonate," and that just tells you or me that the message wasn't for you or me. So, but what have your experiences been? How can this conversation expand you more? Or how can you expand me? I would love to know. With all of that, know that there's so much possible. Explore, experiment with safety, find people. If I mentioned somebody interesting to you and you want to hear more about them or at least get their links, I'm always happy to share. But I want to thank you all for joining me on a topic again that's near and dear to my heart. And I hope that you all have a great experience, a great existence, and we'll continue this journey next time in the next video because there's so much more to say about channeling. But for now, I will say good night and happy healing all.